Today we have with us John, who is passionate about RC planes, and he's going to tell us a lot about them. Welcome, John.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here.
Thank you for being a guest on the BMA podcast. We're all about making, and I want to hear a lot more about RC planes. About that.
When I got started with RC planes, I was probably about 12. My dad and I got into it right around then, and our very first introduction with it was the flight test kits. You get
Okay.
these foam board sheets, and they
Uh
send them
huh.
to you with the laser cut
Okay.
shapes out of them, and it's just hot glue and foam board. You put your own
Wow.
electronics in it and stuff. And our first one was terrible. We built it backwards, and the seams were all on the outside, but it flew.
Oh,
And
wow.
ever since then, we've been building those, and I've learned a lot. But that was a fantastic introduction, and it really taught me that once you start building, there's kind of no going back because you see how much you can do with just building
Okay.
and doing it by hand, and you know what's in it, and you sort of have this understanding of how it all works. I think that's a perfect thing for RC planes.
Are RC planes based on the same principle as regular airplanes? Low pressure, lifting it up.
Yeah, you've got Bernoulli's principle, and you have lift, drag, thrust, and weight.
Okay.
Your standard four directions on the or actions on the aircraft.
Hmm.
It's just scaled down, really. Thrust to weight
Um,
ratios,
yeah.
they're generally a lot higher on RC aircraft.
Right.
A real life airplane has a lot harder of a time going straight up in the air for an unlimited period of time than an RC plane does. I mean, a lot of my models can go straight up
Wow.
forever,
Wow.
where a jumbo jet would fall out of the sky trying to do
Right.
that.
Right.
I
Right.
mean, that's not really comparable always, but the thrust weights are a lot higher.
So give us a lay of the land, like, because I know there's lots of new technical innovations within the fabrication space, but I know that, batteries, motors, things have also developed. So give us a sense of the materials that are available or the types of planes, the innovations within in the space that you've been in from when you started to where you are now.
Oh, sure. I mean, when I first started out, we were doing um, just the foam board model airplanes. You'd go to the Dollar Tree and buy some foam board sheets and your Exacto blades, and you'd start cutting them out from the paper plans. That was I still do that occasionally. Just the ones I do now are a lot faster. Um, and you know Now I'm doing also the balsa wood, balsa wood monocoat. Um, the real more advanced stuff that I'm getting a little into now is fiberglass, and that's where you've got your fiberglass cloth, and you're putting a resin on top of that, something like the two-part resins from like West Systems or the marine type resins. Um, I've also got the oh, what was it? The Zap resins. It's a little bit more sophisticated because you've once you do it, it's happened.
Right.
Your fiberglass is attached to the whatever you're putting it on, be it wood or foam. Um, but it makes for a really interesting stuff to work with, and the final product is really impressive. I've had a chance to work with some people at the university that I fly for, and
Mhm.
they've built some airplanes out of fiberglass and carbon fiber composites using a more sophisticated process that are really incredible. I mean, the kind of strengths and rigidities you get out of those materials is really incredible. I mean,
And
compared to a foam board airplane, it's like it's leaps and bounds.
so, can I just check when you're referring to this and when you say airplanes, you almost always mean RC planes, correct?
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of I fall into the trap of saying airplane, and I mean RC plane. Yeah,
RC plane. Okay, okay. Because I know you said university and you said that they'd make planes. So I was wondering. I mean, universities, they're people do things. I mean, I thought those a full airplane, like
yeah. So I think they have a hope someday of building full scale or close to full scale demonstration aircraft
right.
for proof of concept stuff. But I don't think that's going to be soon. But we'll see. And I imagine at that point they're going to need some more sophisticated constructing processes. But again, we'll see.
I mean, I feel like we're there. I mean, at least in my lifetime, it feels like we already have some really advanced manufacturing techniques already. So I'm already pretty excited about what's going on. Is there like categories, groups, types of RC planes? Like how do you distinguish one from the other? So are they classes?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, what I would say is there are some distinct types. You have your trainer type aircraft where you have something like a high wing, simple aircraft with 3 or 4 channels, ailerons, elevator, rudder, and throttle. Usually a tricycle, sometimes a tail dragger.
Okay.
Usually looking something kind of like a Cessna. You know what a Cessna
Uh-huh.
152 or
Yeah.
172 is? Something like that is kind of a trainer. They're
Right.
usually very easy to fly. You have warbirds, kind of looking like a World War II airplane, like a Mustang or um, a Lag or something like that.
Okay.
And then you have your jets, F-16, A-10 sort of looking type aircraft. Then you have aerobatic airplanes, things like an extra, sort of biplanes that have uh, tall tails and big ailerons. There's sort of some of the main types. Oh, then you have utility planes that have some sort of like a cargo bays. People use those, for example, to drop little parachute guys out of sometimes.
Okay. Okay.
Those can be a lot of fun. Those are some of the main. Oh, how could I forget gliders? Uh, you know,
Oh,
long, skinny, high aspect ratio wings. Sometimes no motor. Great for slope soaring, getting lots of airtime. They put those on winches sometimes, and they winch them up without a propulsion. That's pretty much the main classes. And of course, there are sort of in between classes between each of those. Like you'll have sort of warbird trainers. Like there's a
mm,
plane called the T-28 that's like a warbird trainer. It's a very easy to fly plane where you want to transition from a trainer to a warbird. It's like, yeah, if you're going from that trainer, you go to that to a warbird, so you're not freaked out by the higher speeds and lower or greater wing loadings of a warbird.
so if somebody was starting out, would they like typically approach the trainer aircraft or the
Yeah.
Cessna type aircraft? That's what they would start with.
Absolutely, that's the best way to go. What we see a lot is you have your favorite airplane. It's like you
Mhm.
go and you watch Top Gun and you say, oh, I want to fly the F-14 or I want to fly the F-18 or something. You say, oh, that's a pretty not too expensive. I'll have one of those. And the problem with those airplanes is that they're pretty fast, and a lot of the times they don't come with the stabilization systems that some of the trainers do, and that makes them pretty hard to fly. And like if you're in a park or a smaller space, and you just don't quite have maybe you've flown the simulator a little bit or watched some videos for tips. You think, yeah, I might have this, and you might. It's good to
Yeah.
feel the confidence and stuff, but they're pretty tricky. And for the
Right.
first time, that can be really discouraging, especially to watch that favorite airplane, your dream aircraft, crash and go into
Yeah.
a tree or come
Yeah.
down into a pile, and you got your pile of foam, and that hurts. So we recommend, and I recommend personally, a trainer, something very easy, very slow, just to get that muscle memory and that familiarity with what the sticks do. It's so invaluable.
Right. I mean, I have a friend who's a pilot, a hobby pilot. He has a small plane. He was like, just like motorcycles, there's no substitute for flying time. Like in motorcycles, we say you should ride. Like if you want to be safe, you should keep riding. So, what is that parlance in RC planes? Is it similar, like fly time, or
Yeah, 100%. I mean, uh, personally, I try to fly once a week, and I take 2 batteries a plane, and I make sure to try something new every flight. Whether it's low inverted passes or some sort of new maneuver, or I'll do a couple of different touch and goes and things like that. Just trying to push the boundaries and not get stagnant with my flying.
right?
You know, just making sure that you don't feel like you're losing track on your skills when you go out to fly is important. I think
Yeah.
making sure that you just keep the practice up, and like you said, just uh, riding riding the motorcycle. It's just keep flying.
Yeah.
That's a very important thing in keeping your skills up.
What's the craziest experience you've had, like
Oh,
flying one of the RC planes? Like, I mean, I guess weather-wise, but also, I mean, I've seen a couple of videos, but sometimes I'm not even sure if the video is doctored or real. It makes us great watching, but I don't know if that happens in real life. So
Oh, sure. I would have to probably think about it to find the craziest one for sure. Um, let's see. I think probably the best one is I was flying in Mojave at
mhm.
the actual airport there.
Okay.
They have allowances for RC planes there because there's a lot of engineers out there, and I happened to be there, and it was about 35 or 40 miles an hour wind. And else was flying. It was a little pilot meetup, and they said, let's not fly. But I said, you know what? I have a little plane. It's very heavy. It's very fast. I'll just give it a shot. And I've never flown in winds that high before, but I threw the plane and almost went straight backwards because of how high the winds were.
Uh-huh.
And when I flew it, everyone was like, "Wow, I can't believe that it's flying!" Because the winds were really just incredible. I don't think I've ever flown in winds that high before or since, because it was like I could almost be blown over by how strong the winds were. When I
Like
landed it, the plane kind
just
of tumbled around, but
just for comparison, like a real plane in that kind of wind, like even a Cessna or a single seater or two seater would be fine in like 35, 40 miles an hour, or
it it
that's
could
high
it
for
could
even regular.
fly.
Right.
Uh, but like a Cessna 152 has a crosswind max crosswind component of about 15 knots. So if you're trying to land, even like with a like if the runway is this direction
Yeah.
and the wind is coming at this direction in 30 miles an hour wind, a Cessna 150 could not land in that kind of wind or take off. So that's it's
So,
pretty steep even for a real airplane. Now like a commercial jet, it'd be fine.
so that was really a big deal.
It was fun.
Yeah.
I love to push the boundaries as long as I'm not causing danger, or it's like it's fun just to see what you can do, and what are the limits.
One clarification question I've always wondered is like, why are drones more popular? Because I feel like RC planes, helicopters, they've been around for a while now. Like with drones, people are getting a lot more excited. Is it maneuverability? Like, what is the key differences?
Generally, drones have a little bit lower barrier of entry. Um, Drones, for one thing, you can fly them in a lot smaller space. A drone can hover, an RC
Right.
plane can't.
Okay. Okay.
Um, Pretty much all drones have a basic stability system or better. A lot of RC planes don't. Um, a lot of FPV drones, of course, are FPV, so you can fly them with the FPV, and you can do all kinds of very interesting maneuvers and fly them through tight spaces and do flips and rolls and a lot of really cool tricks. I fly FPV a little bit with drones, and
Okay.
um, you see a lot of really interesting Instagram and social media content of people doing really fantastic maneuvers through tight spaces and flying through abandoned buildings, and it's really really quite engaging. I
Okay.
mean, the truth of the matter is that you're not going to be that good when you start out, and you probably won't ever be that good because it's really tricky. You've got to be really good to pull that kind of stuff off, and even finding places to fly can be kind of tricky. But seeing that, and it's like, wow, I want to do that. That's really cool. Whereas with RC planes, it's like you see it, you might see a massive extra doing these crazy tumbling torque rolls along the runway, or like a close knife edge, and it's like, yeah, that looks great. That thing's expensive. I can't spend 10 grand on this big old 33% extra. you know this little tiny drone, I can a few $100, I can go fly a PV in the park. It's a little
Right.
bit lower barrier of entry to look cool, to be, wow,
Right.
I can do that, I can go do that right now. And the helis, I think, are in a little bit of the same way. The really insane heli maneuvers are very difficult.
Mhm.
The TikToks and the funnels and stuff, and
Yeah.
that's hard. I tried that. I put it in a tree. It's helis are tricky.
Okay.
Um, so I think that's part of why at least FPV drones have such a draw.
Right.
And then the like DJI class drones are kind of for a different crowd. It's more like, yeah, this just kind of flies around, and I can get cool pictures, and it's almost like gliding for RC planes, where it's just kind of, you just sort of push it around. It's a tripod in the sky almost. You can get kind of a cool picture or a neat shot.
Right.
As long as you're not trying to do it for like money, it's like, yeah, this is just kind of relaxing, and I get a cool picture or a family photo or something.
Mhm. So I talked to another guest about RC cars, and he was talking about like the differences between RC cars as toys and RC cars as a hobby. And is there so one question is, are there planes, RC planes that are toy category, and what makes them, cross over into the hobby category?
Yeah, it's I think a similar thing with RC cars. It's repairability, availability of replacement parts. Really high quality things like speed controls, servos, um, yeah, things like the landing gear, even that would seem kind of simple. You wouldn't think about it too much, but springs that actually work, wheels that
Exactly.
have rubber or proper good foam on them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the propellers, are they an actual propeller that has a skew on it that you can go look up and figure out its performance and stuff? Things like, and connectors. Is it a proprietary connector that is real, or is it something that's just sort of this random thing that isn't a real connector, and you're gonna have to cut it off and make a new one if you ever wanted to use a different battery?
Okay.
Or is it like a lot of the toy RC planes that I see out there, they're very simple differential thrust design. So it's just two motors that control the steering based on increasing or decreasing power on either side. And sometimes the entire control is just through those two motors. So it increase power to climb, decrease power to dive, and then
Right.
steer with like skid steering.
Mm.
A lot of toy planes are like that. Really hobby grade planes have actual servos that control the flight
That's
surfaces, and
like, yeah. Yeah.
um, they're a lot more sophisticated generally.
And what's, because I know in the previous question you mentioned something like a $10,000. So is that like what there are RC planes that cost that much?
Oh yeah, yeah. It's either you get up into usually it's the larger stuff, but you get into the turbines that run on kerosene. You get into large gas motors, the big radials, um, the the large ARFs and stuff. Those can start to cost a lot of money, and they're fantastic. They're very cool, but they
Mhm.
have proper flight management systems that go to
Okay.
control boxes and stuff, and you've got redundant power systems and yeah, very
Wow.
carefully controlled servos, and they pretty much all have to have gyros. I mean, you don't have to, but they've all got
Right.
very
Yeah.
fancy ones and redundant receivers and redundant multi-band radios, and they're very fancy, but they're huge and they're very expensive. So you'd want to have all these redundancies. But
So okay, so what when you say huge, like what kind of wingspans are we talking about? Like,
I mean, I personally consider anything bigger than about 10 feet to be huge, but you get up to be
that is
really really
huge.
big. Yeah,
That is huge.
um, 8 feet gets pretty big, but more than about 10 is really massive.
So I
Uh,
mean, so you're definitely gonna fit in a pickup truck, or you.
yeah, I mean they come apart,
Yeah.
but
Oh, okay.
a
Fair
lot
enough.
of times they go to they're in trailers and stuff, and
Yeah.
they
But
they
that
go to
is
the
huge. That is huge.
yeah, they go to the dry lake, and they fly them out there because if you're going to be flying something expensive, you want to have a lot of space. If something
Right.
goes wrong, you want to be able to land it wherever you want to and not have to hit a little patch of runway.
Of course.
But
So the kinds of planes that you make, do you predominantly assemble from kits? I mean, I know you kind of like that was one of the first ones you started with, right? So tell us a little bit about that journey. Like, did you stick to kits? When did you start, maybe modifying? And are you at a point where you're like making your own planes?
yeah, let's see. I think a lot of it has been from the flight test plans. I would go online and you download the plans. You print them out on paper, and they
Hmm.
give you this little diagram of you slice them up, and then you put them together with tape, and then you lay them onto the foam board and you cut it out.
Okay.
I did that for a long time until I got really tired of going through X-Acto blades, and I thought, man, this is boring. And so I got access to a laser cutter,
Hmm.
and I found how um, to import the files properly and to modify them and stuff, and
Right.
I started laser cutting them, and that made it a lot easier.
Mm.
But I probably did about 25 or 30 planes from that over the years, through that method of just cutting them out from foam sheets with paper and knives.
Right.
It's a very simple, and I modify designs basically in small amounts, and sometimes it works, sometimes it didn't work at all. um, and nowadays I'm doing uh, sort of uh, I guess I could call it adaptions of the general characteristics of those airplanes because I'm familiar with them. Like right now, I'm working on this little model, which is supposed to be an indoor airplane. I haven't
Okay.
quite finished it yet, but it's made from thin Depron, uh, and it's adapted from a 3D printed design, but it's scaled way down, and it's going to have a little thrust vectoring system for indoor flight. I haven't flown it yet, obviously, because it's not finished, but it should be
Mhm.
interesting. Um, at the same time, I'm working on a wood kit, a small wood kit airplane.
Wow.
Um, so I've got a lot of projects going at once, but I think it's fun to do different kinds of things. Like there's kits, and there are ARF planes. That what an ARF is it's called almost ready to fly, and what it is you pretty much get chunks. So you get the wings,
Okay.
you get the fuselage, you get all the hardware, but no electronics. So generally, ARFs are a lot easier to put together. It's
Mhm.
not even really a kit. You just kind of chunk them together, and you
Right.
put your
Right.
stuff in it.
Right.
And they're not quite as interesting to build as a kit or going from totally from scratch, uh, but they're a lot faster to get in the air if you want to just go fly something.
Mm. Mm.
One plane that I don't have with me right now is it's in another room. I was working on an adaptation of that wing into a fiberglass composition. It's a foam cord fiberglass airframe with wood trimming. Because I'm working on trying to see how fast I can make these flight test designs go if
Okay.
they're not still made out of foam board. So it's
Okay.
going to be really overpowered and fiberglass. So we'll see how fast it'll go.
Right. Right.
But it's been an interesting process to learn about the fiberglass layup process and stuff, and what works and what doesn't work. I've learned a lot there. It's been a bit of a journey, but
Yeah,
it's
I
fun.
bet. I bet. I bet. What like I mean, but is that so? So you what I guess I was gonna ask what's the favorite one that you built or something? But it already sounds like you have many projects going. But do you have a favorite one?
That's an interesting question. I would probably have to say that one right there with the little red and green arrows on it is pretty
Uh,
fun.
okay.
Um, it's pretty fast. It's the same one as that one. It's a
Okay.
lot faster.
Uh huh.
Um, that one runs on 6 cell, and it's pretty small. It does about 120 miles an hour, uh,
Okay.
and it's little and it's really hard to control, but it's
Okay.
fast and it makes my hands kind of shake when I fly it because it's just really exciting. It's like
Okay.
whoa, and I should have painted different colors because it's got blue and white and gray all over it, and it goes up against the
Uh,
sky and disappears. And it's like, well, where'd it
okay.
go? But yeah, it's a lot of fun. Nothing else that I've built really gets that exciting. And this is another plane that's no longer with us, but it was one of the flight test Viggens. It's a jet, and
Okay.
I designed and 3D printed a thrust vector system for it, so that it angles the thrust out of the tail, so it could do all kinds of really interesting sort of high angle of attack stuff, and like it could sort of do really
Cool.
tight maneuvers sort of within
Right.
its own
Right.
length. It was really fun until I intentionally broke it because it was really beat up. But again, it's a lot of fun to just sort of mess around with stuff like that.
Yeah. So is there like a competition element there? I mean, do you have events where you're competing? Because I know with the RC cars, there's races, right? Obviously. So is this other competitive leagues like that for RC planes?
Yeah, there 100% are. There are, for example, the pattern competitions.
Okay.
Pattern planes are an element of aerobatic planes that are less about like departing flight and like high angle of attack maneuvers and stuff, and more about being extremely precise in your maneuvers. You have a set plan for what you're going to do. You're going to do
Okay.
this loop and then this split S, and then you're going to do it in this time at this speed. It's all very very specific.
Right. Right.
No, I don't do pattern. It's kind of expensive. You've got to have very high end equipment, high end servos, a high end aircraft, a high end airframe, high end motors, and everything. So, but the people who do it are extremely skilled pilots.
Mhm.
There's also there's 3D competitions where it's all about being flashy and showing off and doing very fancy maneuvers and stuff. And who can do the fanciest snap rolls and low torque roll. It's very very interesting.
Right.
There's glider duration competitions. There's all kinds of competitions. I mean, if you can pylon racing, of course, where you have
What that is, what can you
it's
explain
the
that?
very very fast airplanes that only fly for 3 minutes at most. And you
Okay.
have pylons. We have spotters at the end. I think this is how it works, from last what I heard. But you have these spotters, and they will tell you when you've passed the pylon, and your plane turns around and comes back, turn around, come back. It's usually
Kind of like
time bracketed.
water mile racing of
Kind
RC.
of, yeah, but it's not even really how fast you go. You have to stay within a time bracket, or you break out and you lose.
Yeah. Okay.
It's very sophisticated. I haven't done it yet, but it's a very interesting type of racing. But the aircraft are they have no throttle control. So once you start, you're going full speed until they run out of fuel, and they're doing like 200 plus miles an hour usually. So you've got to be
Yeah.
extremely precise with your control. You've got to be on top of it. The kinds of competitions that I do, I fly for university, and they build a plane, and we go out and we do these set couple of flights. Where it's like, oh, you got to fly for 5 minutes, and you got to fly for 5 minutes with weight in it. You got to fly for 5 minutes, but then you've got to do X number of laps or something like that in this time period. And those are kind of fun because you get to meet all kinds of people who have built these crazy airplanes or have these really interesting theories and stuff, and you see all these crashes and stuff. That's always a lot of fun because it's like, oh, they crashed, or they screwed up, or like, oh, that was an amazing flight. That guy did a fantastic job, or he's a really good pilot. So I love going to those.
What kinds of people are flying RC planes? Are they actual pilots flying real planes?
There are some of those. There are a few, but I think it's mainly just people. It's just a widespread of people.
Okay.
You get all walks of life, all varieties of people. You get people who have tons of money who bring out the really fancy stuff, and you see, wow, I see it. He's got the really fancy radios and the really beautiful airplanes, and they're really really nice. And you have just people who like to build stuff and have simple aircraft, and just have sort of more general stuff like I do.
Right.
And then anybody does it, and I think that's one of the great things about it is this. It doesn't have a terribly high barrier to entry.
Okay.
A friend of mine and I were talking about it, and as far as hobbies go, it isn't an unbelievably expensive hobby to get into. A lot of it's totally doable. It's not
Okay.
like building real cars where you
Right.
have to invest tons of money into tuning or buying engines or something.
Right. Right.
So yeah, we get a lot of people who are just doing trainers or doing simple airplanes and stuff, and buying in flies and stuff, and coming to the model airport and just having fun. Except when it comes down to it, that's what it is. It's just having fun and flying your airplane and doing what you want to do.
Yeah. Yeah. I when I met you the first time in person, I also noticed that there was a 3D printed. I think it was mostly 3D printed or almost entirely 3D printed.
Yeah, that P38 is entirely 3D printed. It's been
Okay.
hanging up there for a while, but yeah, it's a 3D lab prints P38 Lightning.
I mean, I have a background in 3D printing, and I was just wondering is how much of an impact has the consumer side of 3D printing had on this in RC planes? Has it had a big impact? Like, are people churning out more stuff because now they can manufacture, or are
Well,
there
it's
more engineering skills involved that? Uh,
it's very interesting. So the problem with 3D printing planes that I've come across is that it's hard to make them sufficiently durable. Because you need to make them light. You cannot have a heavy airplane, a heavy RC plane.
right,
They don't
right,
end up
right.
well.
Mm.
And my first 3D printed RC plane was too heavy. It just wouldn't fly. I throw it, it would crash and break. I threw it a couple of times until it wasn't really in one piece anymore, and then I had to go back and go back to the drawing board, which I did. Um, the modern filament types, the key one being LWPLA, lightweight PLA,
Mm.
is a foaming expanding filament, which is pretty popular for building RC planes. Now it's kind of expensive. It's about 3 times the price of a roll of PLA,
Oh
but
wow.
it's really good. It's about half the weight of PLA or any other filament when you actually set it up correctly, because it expands when it comes out of the the nozzle. So you set the extrusion rate to about half or less, depending on what your goal is, or
Right.
if you've got it set up correctly. So the actual airplane ends up being much less weight compared to regular PLA for
Mm.
about the same amount of material, and it's got a little bit better of a reaction to being crashed or to being having impact. It's got a little bit of a
Right.
give to it that
Could, yeah.
PLA or harder plastics, PETG or others don't.
Makes
Um, the other thing is that there are a lot of companies out there that are making things for 3D printed planes.
Okay.
There are a couple of companies. I think there's, let's see, who was it? I think it's Eclipson is one that's a bit more recent. They seem to have had a
Mhm.
lot of success. They're making a lot of sport models that are just kind of generic aircraft that have been designed from the ground up. 3D Lab Prints has done a lot of planes modeled after historical aircraft, World War II fighters, more modern planes like the Piper Cub and stuff. Like I shouldn't call the Piper Cub modern, but they've done a lot of those. They even released their own lines of filament and stuff. They'll sell you plans, they'll sell you filament, they'll sell you instructions and stuff. They'll give you the whole package pretty much. Um, Now, and I've seen a lot of people online struggling is the thing. They'll go online and they'll say, this is my first airplane,
Mhm.
and I'm 3D printing this, because what I see is people who are familiar with 3D printing from other hobbies. They
Right.
say, I will get into to RC planes and I'll 3D print my first plane,
Mhm.
which is a great idea, but the trick is, going at it from the right direction. Because if you're flying your first airplane and it isn't durable, and
Mhm.
you might not have set it up correctly, that gets kind of challenging.
Right. Right.
Um, and it doesn't always turn out the best. I've seen a lot of crashed 3D printed planes on their very first flight. That's it's kind of sad.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. And
it's
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think that's true for most making. Like even though I used to work with kids, if your the first thing that you make works, then you're more likely to keep making and designing, even if the first thing is not very high quality.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, and that's like what I said about you don't want to buy your World War II plane you love, or that F-15 or something, and then go fly it and you
That's
crash it
right.
and forget it. This isn't for me. I don't want to do this. It's like if you went and you 3D printed for 20-30 hours,
Yeah.
and half a roll of filament, even up just a Piper Cub, because they take a fair bit of filament. They're not small prints. They come in
Yeah.
a lot of sections and they're fairly large objects. Even if you're just using one or two perimeters, um, it takes a lot of filament. And then you spend a lot of time building it because they're not terribly simple.
Right.
They take little carbon spars sometimes to join the parts together, and then it goes and crashes. It's like, well, now all these parts are useless because I glued them together, and it's like, forget it. So it's sort of sad to see it, and I think it would be nice to see, and I'm sure this already exists, but I think it would be helpful if people looked into it a little bit more, like guides on your first 3D printed plane and stuff
Right.
like
Right.
that.
Right. Right.
Because I can't say I've ever seen one in person actually fly. I don't I think what, that's not true. There was one at one of the design build fly the university competitions that I saw fly,
Okay.
um, but it had some really hard landings that kept breaking it because the problem is that you know you have your landing gear has to mount to something,
Mm.
and unless you strengthen the area that it mounts into sufficiently, when you hit the ground,
That's
unless you're having a really soft landing, what the plastic it attaches to is just going to shatter.
yeah.
It's going to come out, and that's what kills some of these 3D printed planes is that that you're mounting it to the same stuff that it's made out of, your ground contact points and like your motor and stuff. If that ever hits the ground, it just tears out, and
Right.
it's kind of hard to repair because you've got perimeters and you've got infill and stuff, and you've got little tiny lines.
You gotta, yeah, yeah, you gotta remake it actually.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you've got to print new pieces, and that gets kind of time consuming.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm a little bit surprised, given that you have spent so much time in the field and that you haven't seen one. It's interesting. So, in terms of what do you think is going to happen next in terms of new techniques or materials, designs that are coming in, which either you're excited about.
Some of the designs from that company Eclipse on are pretty
Yeah.
good. They seem a little more advanced than some of the past designs that were more focused on the scale aspect of it, where it was
Mhm.
like, oh, go and print your favorite airplane. It
Right,
was
right.
more, go and print this plane that's going to fly really good, because we designed it to be a 3D printed plane first and foremost, instead of we designed it to be a P-51 Mustang. We designed this to be the 3D printed sport plane, the 3D printed trainer plane.
Right.
Um, I think going from that aspect, from the ground up, is a really good idea, because when you're working with a material that isn't quite as ideal as something like foam or balsa wood or fiberglass or something like that, it's important to work with the limitations you're constrained by.
Mhm.
Um, and so I've seen a couple of those online fly really well.
Okay.
I was watching a video yesterday, of a model airport, and they were flying. I think it was one of the Eclipse on trainers, and its landing gear were a little sketchy, but it seemed to fly great. I mean, it was flying around really nicely. I just haven't seen one in person of those yet. And if I had more of that lightweight PLA, maybe I'd make one.
Mhm.
Um, but it is pretty expensive. It's like $70 a roll, which is kind of
Wow.
steep.
Yeah,
Maybe
that's.
it's $55 last time I checked, but it's a smaller roll too.
Mhm.
Um, there's also been recently, it's a pre-foamed lightweight PLA. So usually when you print lightweight PLA, it comes out of the nozzle and then it foams, so it expands
Right,
then.
right.
A couple of companies now sell a pre-foamed lightweight PLA, so it's not quite as light when it's finished,
Mhm.
but it's less expensive.
Because
So it's like,
it's dimensionally predictable, right?
yeah, and it is more, yeah, because with the lightweight PLA, you've got to do a bit of experimentation before you get it right.
Mhm.
Um, I've done my fair share of prints where I've looked at the back and I've realized that where it comes back and starts the next layer, there's gaps along that seam where it
Mhm.
starts,
Yeah.
because when you go, or when you hop with that filament, it doesn't stop, because
Mhm.
it's foaming and it's coming out of the nozzle, so you get terrible stringing, and you get all these gaps. It's really frustrating to work with, because it doesn't retract like a normal filament does.
Right, right,
So
right.
it takes a lot of getting used to.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Makes sense.
but I've seen some people do really good work with it. It's just a matter of adapting to it. I think some of the faster printers would do a really good job with it, like some of those bamboo lab printers, and some of the ones that have extremely high accelerations,
Yeah,
because
yeah, yeah.
they can just move from place to place
Yeah,
fast and not worry about stringing quite as much.
sure. That makes sense. I mean, you were referring to like the difference, like how people get started. So, do you think like a lot of people are still fixated on like RC versions of the real plane, whereas maybe it sounds like maybe the emerging category is just planes that fly well, which
Yeah,
are not necessarily kind of like versions of real aircraft.
right. I think that's a really good point. I see, because I work at the hobby store, and I see a lot of people. They come and they point at the one on the shelf that's like the F-18 or the
Right.
P-51 Mustang, and they say, "I want to fly that one. What do I need?" And I say, "Well, that's just the airplane. You got to have all this stuff," and
Mhm.
that's always kind of discouraging, because having to buy a bunch of stuff for your first airplane kind of hurts.
Right.
And I feel bad too, because if you go and buy a bunch of stuff before you're sure you like something, before you're sure you like a hobby,
Yeah.
you feel like you're stuck into it. You
Right.
you you
Right.
you get this whole pile of things, and you go and you crash it. It's like,
Yeah.
now you're
Yeah.
just stuck with this thing
Or-
that you can't get rid of, and
Yeah.
that's terrible. So I think it's hard to get away from that mindset too, because the thing that looks cool is the thing you want.
Mhm.
It's like driving a crummy car. It may be what you need. It may be inexpensive to gas up, and it may be inexpensive to drive, and it may be reliable, but you want to have a cool car.
Yeah.
You want to be in like an old Corvette or something. You want to be cool. So I totally get where it's coming from, and I feel that way too. My crummy little Honda isn't very cool to look at. The paint's all falling off of it and stuff, but it's pretty cheap and it's very reliable. So I see where that's coming from entirely.
Right. Well, I mean, so that's not really an RC plane problem. It's just a
Yeah,
human problem.
it's a human nature thing. Yeah,
It's a human
entirely.
nature. Yeah, I can see that. So let's switch tracks a little bit. I mean, you told us when you got involved, but why did you get involved? Like, what was specific? Like, what attracted you specifically to planes in general? Did you because you started doing this at 12, so I'm sure there's other things you tried, or maybe you wanted to get into RC planes. Tell us a little bit about your situation at that point, how you were feeling, maybe, or your background.
I I think it was I was just coming out of being very sick for a while. I'd been ill,
Okay.
um, and it was I was messing with this little glider,
Yeah.
and it was I was putting a little motor on it. My dad said, "Well, you know what? We have these radio controls from an old airplane that I had. Do you want to try making that RC?" And it was just this sort of this burst of inspiration to say, "Yeah, let's try that. Let's try something different, something new."
Okay.
And it was just this whole new thing that was out there. There's sort of this whole world of things to try, and
Mm.
there was, I know it's kind of corny to say this, but the sky was the limit. There was so much to do, so many options. Um, it was very exciting to just go out to the park and fly our little airplanes. And I've always kind of loved aviation. My parents, my room when I was a little kid had little airplanes on the curtains and stuff.
Oh
These
wow.
little
Okay.
these little wooden airplanes from the ceiling fan like pull strings.
Uh-huh.
So I think it was kind of seeded into my brain. I was like,
Okay.
uh, I was destined to be into model airplanes, in some way or another. Whether it had been full scale aviation or model aviation, but model aviation is a lot cheaper.
Yeah, of course.
So uh, this is probably the right way to go. But yeah, I think it was yeah, it's just this sort of inspiring adventure. Go to the park and see what happens. You build
Right.
something and you throw it, and then something happens.
So I mean, it sounded like you said there was an old RC plane that your dad maybe had leftover parts of it, and that's how you got your start. So is he also a co-participant in this hobby, or he was there when you first started it, and that's how it went?
Yeah, he is. We don't fly as much together anymore as we used to, or we would like to, because he has his weekends off, and then I work weekends. So it's
Oh,
just kind of
wow.
this
That's a bit
unfortunate
challenging. Yeah.
scheduling conflict. But we still fly when we get the chance to, and he indulges my sort of experimentation and says, oh, yeah, that's a great idea, or yeah, here, let's clean up some space so you can store your stuff here, or
Mm.
maybe you shouldn't put that airplane on the kitchen table for storage permanently. So it's like, yeah, he's helped me a lot with this, and yeah, he's definitely still an active participant. And we go to indoor fly-ins occasionally and stuff, and
Okay.
we all fly together. So it's whenever we get a chance to fly, we still do.
And people do things because they feel emotions with it. Older, retired people love muscle cars. Nostalgia is emotion. Artists painting, I'm going to forget the world. It's an expression of who I am, my personality. So if you had to try to define your excitement for RC planes in those terms, like what would that be?
Hmm. I think I get a lot of satisfaction out of seeing something that I imagined or I envisioned work, out of seeing a concept that I came up with, or a plan that I had
Mhm.
come to life in the sky or in flight, and say, you're like, yeah, I want to have this thing be fast, or maneuver in this way, or do XYZ thing, and I go out and I fly it and I feel it happen. So yeah, that was satisfying. That feels good. That's a reflection on my ability as a builder, or as a pilot, or as XYZ thing. That feels good. That's nice. I like
I
that.
think that's a very maker emotion to feel. Referring back to other guests I've had who are makers, and makers make many diverse things. But the one thing makers are super excited by is taking an idea that they have in their head and making it a reality. I've discussed it in other episodes where people just find it extremely addicting. Like,
Mm.
that, hey, I thought it up, and then now it's out in the real world. It actually works. And when it doesn't, the challenge of making it work the way you want it to work is thrilling, actually.
Yeah, and it's you have to think, well, why didn't this work? What did it do? What's the next step to take?
Right,
Back to the drawing board. Is it just little adjustments? What's the thing happening here? And
right.
that's almost as fun, I think.
Yeah,
It's the process of rebuilding and thinking about it. That's great. I mean, that's always fantastic. As long as it's not in so many pieces you can't rebuild it.
of course, of course. No, I mean, it's always within your capacity, capability, really, that you want to do those exercises. So, last question before we end: what would be a piece of advice that you would give somebody who is just getting started with RC planes?
I don't want to be contrary to my advice of take it slow and start with simple airplanes, but always keep sight on some goals. Say like, oh, I want to fly this class of aircraft. I want to get good at this. Say, oh, I want to be a really good 3D pilot. I want to do these kinds of maneuvers. I want to do pattern. I want to do F3J. Something like that. I want to do this, and set that in advance and just think about it. Keep it in your mind's eye. And
Right,
it's always fun to window shop. I love window shopping, and always just think about what's out there.
right.
Never lose track of what is out there, and take it slow, but just keep it in mind.
So
There's
kind
so
of
many
set,
opportunities.
set a maybe like a really ambitious, not but like a potentially large a goal where you might need more skills and equipment, but sort of aim towards that while you kind of take all the smaller steps, right? Keep that larger picture in mind, right?
Yeah,
Basically,
you should always have a goal you're striving for. You should always try something new.
right. Very cool. Thank you so much, John. It was such a pleasure talking with you. I learned a lot about RC planes. This is not an area that I knew much about, and hopefully our audience did as well. So thank you again for being a guest on the Be a Maker podcast.
Well, of course, I was glad to be here, and I had a good time.